Picture this for a second. You're standing right at the edge of an endless, hostile expanse of towering sand. It's totally void of life. The ground practically looks like it's swallowing the horizon whole. Now, imagine watching that exact same desolate wasteland transform into a lush, thriving ecosystem right before your eyes. I know, it sounds literally like science fiction, right? But it's an entirely real, breathtaking, ecological mega-engineering marvel. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're setting off on a massive, cinematic journey to unpack exactly how this impossible greening miracle was actually engineered. We're going to see how the absolute cutting edge of space-age materials and advanced microbiology teamed up with, well, fluffy little animals.
Which brings us to a seriously mind-bending paradox. How on earth did millions of rabbits stop a desert? I mean, globally, the rabbit is pretty infamous for being this unstoppable plague, right? An invasive destroyer that literally strips ecosystems bare. Yet, as you'll see, we're going to look at how this exact same animal was positioned as the hero, the literal biological engine of a multi-billion-dollar environmental reclamation project. But to understand how the ultimate destroyer became the savior, we first got to wrap our heads around the sheer, terrifying scale of the enemy they were fighting.
And the enemy was what locals historically called the Sea of Death. The reality of the Kabuki Desert is just staggering. We're talking winters plummeting to -4 degrees Fahrenheit, unleashing these brutal winds that slice across your skin like knives. And then, during the scorching summers, the ground physically burns. For decades, the winds just kept growing stronger, and these colossal sand dunes, some of them towering up to 200 feet high, which is like a 20-story building, became this slow-moving, unstoppable physical force. They swallowed up ancient farmlands, they buried highways, and literally suffocated entire communities, forcing mass evacuations.
And the crazy thing is, the Kabuki was just one part of a much, much larger nightmare. By the year 2015, the creeping sands had claimed 2.6 million square kilometers of land across China. To put that into perspective, that is an area of absolute devastation larger than the entire country of Algeria. But framing it purely as an environmental crisis kind of misses the full picture. This was a severe economic catastrophe. The creeping sand was destroying rural livelihoods, plunging families into poverty, and whipping up these massive dust storms that were actually choking major urban centers, even as far away as Beijing.
Now, when we hear the word desertification, we usually just picture moving sand, right? But the true crisis is actually happening down on a microscopic level. Think of fertile dirt as this thriving, bustling, underground city. It's full of bacteria, organic matter, and nutrients that basically allow it to hold water and support plants. Desertification is the total death of that underground city. Once the soil microbiome dies, all that's left is empty, shifting sand. So you can't simply build a wall to stop a desert. You literally have to resurrect the dead soil.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, the biological engine.
So, to resurrect this underground city without having to transport millions of tons of artificial fertilizer into a totally barren wasteland, a local entrepreneur named Wang Wenbao engineered this absolutely brilliant closed-loop system right out in the heart of the sand. It works like this. First, you have the willow trees. Now, these aren't your typical weeping willows. These are biological anchors driving 300 feet deep into the earth, kind of like steel rebar, and they act as massive water pumps. Step 2, rabbits are introduced to feed on the fresh willow shoots. And finally, Step 3, the rabbits excrete nutrient-rich manure right at the base of the trees. It's perfectly cyclical. The trees feed the rabbits feed the soil, and the soil feeds the trees.
But they didn't just use any random rabbit for this. They deployed the French Rex rabbit, which is actually often called the white gold of the fur industry. These little guys are remarkably robust. They can survive those extreme desert temperature swings while needing very, very little water. But here is the most brilliant mechanical detail of the whole setup. Rex rabbits actually cannot digest grass seeds. So, as they eat and just naturally do their business across the landscape, they basically become living, breathing, automated seed drills. They are precision planting vegetation that's perfectly wrapped in its own little package of organic fertilizer. The transformation this causes is just profound. The rabbit manure acts as the ultimate biological spark plug. See, dead sand lacks nutrients and just blows away easily. But the manure is packed with nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the exact stuff the dead desert completely lacks. When this breaks down, it creates moist humus. The nitrogen and phosphorus essentially act like a biological glue, binding those loose, dead sand crystals together into a rich, dark, moist sponge that physically traps water. So what takes nature decades to build on its own is accelerated to a fraction of the time by this furry little biological factory.
Let's move to the next piece of the puzzle and see how this builds. Section 2, high-tech sand control. Because here's the thing,
biology alone just wasn't enough to conquer the Sea of Death. To scale this up to a massive, industrial, landscape-altering level, this biological engine was paired with advanced robotics and actual space-age technology. We're talking basalt geogrids. These are networks made from molten volcanic rock, actually adapted from the Chinese space program, and it's essentially like casting a giant molten rock fishing net over the moving dunes to instantly pin them down. Then, they spray a liquid solution of cyanobacteria right over the sand. It's basically a microbiological skin that acts like spraying a living scab over the sand to heal the wound, speeding up what would normally be 10 years of natural soil growth into just 16 months. And above it all, heavy UAVs and drones are flying through the harsh skies, completely replacing manual labor to precision bomb hard-to-reach dunes with seeds.
Now, to fuel and protect this massive system, they introduced a concept called agrovoltaics. Simply put, this is the simultaneous use of land for both solar power generation and agriculture. Out there, the harsh desert sun evaporates precious groundwater almost instantly. But these immense arrays of solar panels act as massive metallic canopies, almost like artificial clouds, that forcefully alter the microclimate underneath them. They actually drop the surface temperature by up to 8 degrees Celsius and dramatically reduce the wind speed at ground level. It creates the shaded, protected sanctuary where life can actually survive.
And the sheer scale of this operation borders on the surreal. Just imagine 196,000 solar panels making up the Junma solar plant in the Kabuki. If you look at it from space, the whole thing is arranged in the shape of a colossal galloping horse. It's wild. But it's not just a power plant. Underneath the shade of this giant metallic horse, grasses are growing, and sheep, geese, and rabbits are naturally grazing and fertilizing the ground. So it's an energy plant and a fully functioning eco-farm perfectly fused into one massive, unified machine.
The math behind combining this biology and robotics is just completely undeniable. Look at the vegetation coverage. It absolutely exploded from less than 3% back in 1990 to nearly 85% by 2021. That is a staggering visual transformation. The groundwater, which is literally the liquid gold of the desert, has risen by 5 to 6.5 feet. That means the water table is literally swelling back to life beneath the sand. And with the water and the plants returning, the wildlife has naturally followed. Entire species that had completely vanished, like desert foxes and wild deer, are now roaming areas that used to be nothing but blowing sand and dry bones.
And this brilliantly illustrates our next point. Section 3, the Australian rabbit paradox. To really understand this paradox, we have to completely flip the script and shift our narrative about 4,000 miles south to examine a parallel ecological disaster. I mean, how can the exact same animal be a total miracle worker in Asia, but a devastating disaster in the Southern Hemisphere? Well, it comes down to management. China's kabuki is a heavily regulated, closed-loop machine. The rabbits are never allowed to just roam free. They're kept in these penned eco-farms, fed harvested willow leaves, and their manure is strictly, precisely managed. Contrast that with Australia. Their experience started back in 1859, when just 24 European rabbits were released into the wild. It was an open release, and it caused sheer biological chaos.
Without any natural predators and with basically endless space, that population exploded into the billions. The open release approach in Australia resulted in an ongoing, massive catastrophe that currently threatens 322 native species of plants and animals. Because they didn't just eat the grass, you know? They consumed the highly vulnerable seedlings, they terraformed the dirt with their destructive burrows, and they triggered a terrifying boom in invasive predators. The crisis got so bad, it literally forced the Australian government to rely on extreme biological controls, like introducing the myxomatosis virus, just to try and keep the rabbits from entirely consuming the continent.
Which brings us to our final section. Section 4. Miracle, Myth, or Model. Okay, time for a reality check. With over $10 billion in economic value on the line here, as an explainer, we really have to impartially separate fact from PR fiction. Environmentalists rightly point out that the rabbit's role might actually be a bit exaggerated by corporate entities, like the ENN Group, to create a really captivating viral narrative. And that might be masking the fact that the real success comes from massive government funding and high-tech land management. Also, there's actually no official United Nations verification detailing this massive release of 1 million rabbits. Plus, accumulating massive amounts of rabbit manure can seriously backfire. Think of it like taking way too many vitamins. An overdose of nitrogen can turn the groundwater toxic, triggering really dangerous green algae blooms if it's not perfectly, meticulously managed.
But here is the major takeaway. Regardless of whether the whole rabbit mythos is the primary driver or just a heavily exaggerated supporting act, the broader technological model is absolutely proven. These methods are rapidly becoming humanity's blueprint. China's Great Green Wall paved the way back in 1978, and by 2011, the UN officially recognized kabuki as a global model. Today, these exact high-tech strategies, like the agrovoltaics and these synthetic biocrusts we talked about, are actively being exported. They're being deployed in the drying deserts of Saudi Arabia, and right now, they are heavily integrated into Spain's Andalusia 2030 restoration plan. They are literally being deployed to stop southern Europe from turning to dust.
So, what does this all mean for us? We've looked at space-age grids, synthetic biological skins, and the really paradoxical power of the humble rabbit. The Kabuki Desert proves something absolutely crucial. A completely degraded environment is not a permanent death sentence. It is simply a physical state, and it's a state that we now have the technology to reverse. So, I'll leave you with this. If humanity possesses the engineering capability to bring a completely dead desert back to life, what is truly stopping us from restoring the rest of our planet? Thanks so much for joining me in this explainer. I'll see you next time.